I'm thinking of getting married, and she wants to live here with you, Mom." His words left me shocked, twice. First, my son's wedding announcement of getting married. He, who had just turned 40 this year, had been whining about not having a girlfriend, even in front of me. Second, it was unusual these days for a bride to be positive about living with her mother-in-law. Up until then, my son and I had been living together in this 2-bedroom apartment. My husband passed away from overwork before my son entered elementary school. Ever since then, my son and I had been supporting each other. My son was still a young child, but he tried his best to support me, even cooking dinner for me as I was working tirelessly day and night. Even after he grew up and started working, my son did not leave home as he was always concerned about me. He cared and didn't want me to be living alone and lonely. I had mixed feelings about him. It was then that he announced his will to get married. "You don't have to worry about me. Why don't you look for a house where you can live as a couple without interruption?" I somehow felt anxious about living with a daughter-in-law. Before moving to this apartment, I had lived with my husband's parents at their house. Living together was really tough. I was nagged at by my mother-in-law, and my father-in-law ordered me around with loads of chores on a daily basis. As a result, I collapsed within a year of marriage and had days when I could not even get out of bed. My mother-in-law tried to force me out of bed and make me do the housework. I got so scared that I confessed everything to my husband. My husband was genuinely worried about me and decided to leave his parents' house with me.
"What kind of daughter-in-law are you? Trying to steal our precious son? You can leave by yourself."
My mother-in-law continued to rant until the last minute before we moved out. My husband turned his back on his parents and brought me to the apartment where we live now. That's why I couldn't agree to live with my son and his wife. No matter how friendly you try to be, your daughter-in-law is still a stranger. Living together will definitely cause frustrations. I knew from my bitter experience with my in-laws how hard it would really be to endure such a life. Knowing that, I was hesitant to live with my daughter-in-law. Seeing my hesitation, my son decided to bring the girl who would be his wife to our home. He wanted me to see what kind of person she was.
"Nice to meet you. I hope we can get along."
She was 20 years old, much younger than my son. She was a very quiet girl, nervously keeping her eyes cast down. I couldn't help but wonder, how did such a young girl meet my son and decide to marry him? I couldn't stop wondering. Seeing my confused expression, my son, with a bashful smile, began to explain how they met. He's an instructor at a driving school, and she was one of his students, it seems.
"At that driving school, most instructors are pretty strict. But he was really kind, and before I knew it, I fell for him."
She shyly explained her reasons for falling for my son. Upon hearing this, my son turned beet red. At first, I was surprised, but seeing the happiness on my son's face, I felt like crying. Finally, a woman had appeared who could support my son. "You say you want to live with us. Are you really sure? If you need financial help, I can assist. Fortunately, I have some savings. If it can support my son and her in their happiness, I want to help as much as possible." I proposed this sincerely, but she shook her head vigorously.
"If you're okay with it, I really want to live together. I want to help out, to pay back for all the hard work you've done."
What a kind-hearted girl she was. Not only did she care for my son, but she also cared about me, her future mother-in-law. I was both surprised and touched. With her, I thought maybe we could make it work, living under the same roof. Before I knew it, I found myself nodding in agreement. And so, my son and she got married, and we all started living together in our apartment. But the new bride turned out to be a surprising character. Just a week into our shared living, I began to feel a sense of unease.
"Mother-in-law, let me do all the housework. You take it easy."
I had thought she would continue to work even after we lived together, but apparently, she hadn't been working even before the marriage, and there was no sign of her getting a job. She did do the housework, but the laundry was sloppy, and frankly her cooking was not so great. but I felt if I said anything, she might take me as a nagging, difficult mother-in-law, so I chose to bear with it. Wanting to lighten her load a little, I said, "Thank you for always cooking. Let me handle dinner today. Why don't you take a break?" But she refused flatly.
"No, I'll do it. Please don't take my work away from me."
She stubbornly refused. So the moment we decided to live together, I was no longer able to step into my own kitchen. Even when I tried to help out with the cleaning and took out the vacuum cleaner, she snatched it away from me with a slightly irritated look on her face.
"So, listen, mother-in-law. I've told you. It's my job. Please, just stay out of it."
Her attitude was drastically different from the one she had shown when we first met after the wedding, and I found myself utterly bewildered. My son, wanting to provide for his wife and me, started working a part-time job at night, in addition to his full-time job during the day. This meant he often came home late, leaving her and me alone in the house for long stretches of time. She complained about virtually everything I did, which led me to retreat into my bedroom more and more. Whenever I'd emerge out to go to the restroom, I'd find her relaxing in the living room, nonchalantly watching TV. I felt incredibly uncomfortable in my own home, and I couldn't help but sigh quietly to myself. But that was not all. At one point, my son said something that took me completely by surprise. "Mom, don't you think you're making her work a little too hard? It's not fair to make her do all the housework." "What?" I exclaimed in surprise, raising my voice involuntarily. My son was looking at me with a grimace as if I was the villain. Despite telling me to do nothing, she had been playing the victim and complaining to my son. "I'm not making her do anything. She said she would do all the housework." "Well, she is your daughter-in-law. She's obviously trying to be respectful to you. You should appreciate her more. It's not fair to her. She's so young." I was perplexed by my son's logic, that her youth was a cause for sympathy, and to be honest, I was hurt that he wouldn't believe my side of the story. Since then, I'd had to constantly be on my toes around her. However, she would always misinterpret my actions, and I ended up constantly troubled and distressed. Still, I would occasionally say, "Thank you for everything you do. I'll take care of things around the house today. Why don't you go out and relax?" But her responses were always along the lines of,
"Are you trying to say that I'm in the way when I'm home? I'm going to have dinner with my husband, so you should eat first, mother-in-law." Unbeknownst to my son, who came home late, I found myself eating alone in my bedroom. The silence of my bedroom with no television made me feel incredibly lonely. I could hear her laughing at the TV show in the living room. I began to fear that I would forever be treated as an intruder in this home. This went on for almost a year. One day, after I finished eating in my room as usual, I headed to the kitchen to wash the dishes. I quickly inverted my gaze from the living room, which had been completely redecorated to suit my daughter-in-law's taste, and began to wash the dishes in a hurry. Suddenly my eyes caught my daughter-in-law, who was relaxing on the sofa, slowly rising to her feet. "Excuse me, could you stop it already?" Her first words left me speechless. As I turned my head in confusion, she bared her teeth at me. "Don't play dumb," she exclaimed. "Your late husband built this apartment, right? I found that out while cleaning up your room the other day. You must have substantial savings from the rental income. Why are you letting my husband work while you just laze around at home?" Indeed, this apartment, where 8 families, including us, reside, was built by my late husband for our living. My husband was a good businessman running a company, and he made a bold decision to separate our living room from his parents. I lost my mother at an early age, and my father was happily living with his second wife. So at the time, my husband was my only source of support. "Even if something happens to me, I won't let you struggle." He built this apartment so that I could live a stable life for the rest of my life. As long as there are tenants, there is a steady income. Nevertheless, the reason our son works is that he wants to be independent. My son, who now has a wife, is trying to provide for his family in his own way. However, it seems that his wife misunderstands that I am causing him to struggle because I am here. The words of my daughter-in-law continued. "Eventually, mothers who can't let go of their children are totally dependent on them financially, right? To be frank, it's annoying. An unemployed, living on a pension like you is hindering our life. If you care about your son, please leave this apartment." I couldn't understand what my daughter-in-law was saying at all. In the first place,
Wasn't it you who wanted to live together? I have no idea when I have ever clung to my son.
If it's hard for you to say, I'll tell him directly. The apartment and inheritance from your late husband are his, so I'm sure he'll get you into a good nursing home.
Ignoring my defiant daughter-in-law for a moment, I finished the dishes, and then there was only one thing I wanted to say. Listen, you seem to be misunderstanding something, but the landlord here is not my son.
Huh?
At her somewhat stupid voice, I sighed internally and continued. Listen well. First of all, thank you for cleaning my room, but did you rummage through my things without permission? The property deed of the apartment was in the back of the drawer. My daughter-in-law's shoulders trembled. Even if she's family, rummaging through my belongings is a criminal act.
You're the bad one for hiding what he should have. Why do you have it?
Well, because I'm the owner.
That's a lie. He said he was the owner.
To quiet my daughter-in-law, I showed her the deed of the apartment. Look, my name's on it. It's not his. She was speechless. Just then, my son returned home at the perfect time. Sensing the tension in the room, he seemed panicked, too. His wife, with a great deal of aggression, thrust the apartment deed at him.
Hey, weren't you saying you're the owner of this apartment? How do you explain this?
My son, left stunned by his wife's intense fury, finally looking guilty, he responded, I'm sorry. I just wanted to impress you a bit. I wanted you to say, wow. It seemed like he lied a small lie, hoping to get some praise from his wife. Actually, when I eventually pass away, the apartment will indeed be his, so he wasn't entirely wrong.
We've been patient all this time, haven't we? Let's make you the owner now, and have your mother move into a nursing home. That way everyone will be happy, don't you think?
Nursing home? But our son tried to object, but his wife's momentum was unstoppable.
We've struggled through living together when we didn't even want to. Isn't it time we got a reward?
I knew it. She never really wanted to live with me, it seems. She was trying to flatter me and make a good impression, but in the end, she found me too much of a nuisance. My son seemed conflicted for a while, caught in the argument between his wife and me, but eventually turned to me. Mom, I'm sorry. I'll find you a good nursing home, I promise. I won't let you suffer. So, could you give this apartment to me? Apparently my son had decided to side with his wife. Well, I guess it can't be helped. Husbands should prioritize their wives. But I too have endured a lot over the past year. I have no intention of meekly moving into a nursing home. Fine. I'll transfer the ownership of this apartment to you. Do what you wish. But I'm choosing my new place myself. I said just that and returned to my bedroom. I could hear the triumphant voice of my daughter-in-law from the other side of the door.
We did it! Now we can finally become the owners of this apartment!
I could also hear my son's voice echoing his wife's excitement. I could feel the days of hard work with my son crumble like a house of cards, but I couldn't afford to be downcast. I decided to make my next move. Several days later, I transferred the ownership of the apartment to my son as promised, and decided to leave the apartment immediately. I kept my new place of residence a secret. Mom, thank you so much. I'll do my best from here on out.
Thank you so much. We're going to be happy together.
My son and his wife saw me off, cheerful as always. I bade them farewell with a forced smile. I moved into a condominium with nursing care services. It had a view of the mountains and the sea, a dream my late husband and I had. The spacious and comfortable environment, without creaking floors, like the old apartment, and the vast view seemed to cleanse my soul. Just then, a call came in on my mobile phone. It was from my son. When I answered, a voice filled with rage reached my ears. Mom, what the hell? The apartment has a severe termite infestation. They say it needs to be rebuilt. Just as I thought, a few months before I decided to move out, termites were found during a building inspection. The building was old, and I was considering rebuilding it, but my son was too busy with work, and I hadn't had the chance to discuss it with him. I had informed the other tenants in advance, and they had all agreed to move out. As it was my responsibility, I covered the moving costs, and there were no issues. Despite the mass departure of tenants, my son and daughter-in-law hadn't realized the urgency of the situation. The apartment is yours now, isn't it? Whether you rebuild it or demolish it, you can do as you please. What? Both options are incredibly expensive. I can't afford it. Can't you chip in a little? Absolutely not. This conversation is over. To tell the truth, I had $1 million that I had saved by investing my late husband's inheritance. I had been saving for my son's future, but now I didn't feel that way at all. That's why I was able to use it openly as a down payment for this condominium. My daughter-in-law chimed in on the phone.
Why hasn't your son inherited a single cent of his father's estate? This is unfair. That's not what we agreed on.
Before my husband passed away, he left me a will, bequeathing all his property to me. Apparently, he was concerned about his greedy parents trying to manipulate our son, his grandson, to get their hands on the wealth. Fortunately, I was completely estranged from my in-laws after we stopped living together. That was indeed a blessing. My son, I'm sure, must have been bragging to his wife about the apartment and even the savings, lying through his teeth. It was clear as day that his wife's motive for marrying him was money.
Please help me. I've always dreamed of being a stay-at-home wife.
Well, if you're out of money, you'll have to work. You're young. You can find jobs anywhere, right? Best of luck. Marriage isn't always about happiness. Overcoming various hardships is what defines a couple. Perhaps this is a fitting end for my son's wife blinded by money, and my son who prioritized such a wife, neglecting his own mother. Afterward, my son spent all his money to demolish the apartment. He planned to sell the land once it was cleared, but the truth is, it was leased from a third party, and according to the agreement, it had to be returned after the demolition. His plan to profit from the land sale crumbled to dust, so the couple ended up penniless. To accommodate his wife's unwillingness to lower her living standards, my son is apparently working tirelessly day and night. I've changed my phone number so there are no calls, but somehow they found out my address, and I received letters from my son and his wife every month. I discard them without opening. I don't want anyone to disrupt this elegant, solitary life of mine. Outside the window, the blue sea and the green trees are shining in the sunlight. My deceased husband smiles at me from his portrait near my bed. You could help him, you know. Not sure about his wife, though. I felt as if he was speaking to me that way.